The Joy of Job, an investigator's perspective on the most righteous man on earth. Part 1, a reset. Imagine walking into a house of worship and catching a wisp of a conversation. Two men are talking. One says, "Hey, did you notice that when I walk through services, people part to make a path for me?" Intrigued, you edge closer. This must be a powerful man, you think. Is he a preacher? A rock star? A sports hero? Everyone stops talking when I enter the room. They hang on my every word, he said. And when I smile at them, they can't believe they came so close to me. Did he really say that? If he were a preacher or a politician, would you like him? If he were a famous musician, would you respect him? More importantly, would you leave thinking that someone so fixated on his own acclaim, someone who so loved the stage of human approval, was truly righteous? Yet, these are the sentiments of Job, the main character in the ancient biblical story known around the world. In chapter 29 of the Old Testament book, Job recalls his life before catastrophic events overtook him. Job said, "When I went to the gate of the city and took my seat in the public square, the young men saw me, and they stepped aside, and the old men rose to their feet. The chief men refrained from speaking and covered their mouths with their hands. The voices of the nobles were hushed, and their tongues stuck to the roofs of their mouths. Whoever heard me spoke well of me, and those who saw me commended me. When I smiled at them, they scarcely believed it. The light of my face was precious to them." To many of us, the story of Job is both familiar and troubling. These passages aside, Job is known as a good guy who gets caught in a cosmic battle between God and Satan. He undergoes a test of loyalty and passes, but only after losing everything. What kind of God would do that? Come join us today to hear what I hope you agree is a remarkable case for reinterpreting this ancient mystery. I'm Maribeth and this analysis is based on my book, The Joy of Job, an investigator's perspective on the most righteous man on earth. Quoting more than 350 verses, The Joy of Job is the result of a painstaking analysis of biblical scriptures. Its purpose is to lead all of us, like Job, on a sacred journey into joy. First, let's revisit the sequence of events. In ancient Arabia, Job was the greatest man in the East and very wealthy. He was a lender, a banker of sorts. One day, Satan and the angels came before the Lord, and the Lord singled out Job. He pointed out to Satan that Job was blameless and upright. Satan attributed Job's righteousness to his being so very, very blessed. And, he argued, that if Job lost everything, he would curse God, an act of blasphemy that would hurl Job into Satan's domain and ultimate possession. So the Lord gave Satan permission to strike Job. And through a series of catastrophes, both natural and man-made, Job lost his possessions. He lost his oxen and his donkeys. He lost his sheep. He lost his camels. And with each catastrophic event, he lost his servants. Finally, Job lost his children, all 10 of them. Although later in the story, Job accused God of wronging him, in the beginning, he did not. Job responded to the set of events with famous words that have rallied suffering people across the globe. He said, "The Lord gives, and the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." So Satan lost the challenge, but he did not give up. Satan argued that Job remained faithful simply because he did not suffer enough. With the Lord's permission, Satan went in for another round. Now Job lost his health. When Job's wife told him to curse God and die, he rejected her suggestion. "Shall we accept good from God and not trouble?" he asked. Then Job's remaining family abandoned him. Job's servants, who presumably worked with Job closely for years, also abandoned him. Meanwhile, the townspeople ridiculed him, humiliated him, jeered him, and mocked him. The only people who spent time with Job were 4 friends, 3 older men named Eliphaz, Zophar, and Bildad, and a younger man named Elihu. And although they were called comforters, they were very, very tough on him. In the traditional interpretation of this book, Job is characterized as righteous, benevolent, generous, and a good father. This interpretation is based on the first 2 of 42 chapters. It is also built on Job's claims about his own righteousness and on the famous and comforting verses in which Job declares faith in his Redeemer. These beautiful passages comprise about 7% of the verses in the book of Job. Now, the problem with brushing aside most of the book of Job is that God comes out as the bad guy. You can whitewash it any way you want, but in the end, God comes across as deeply disturbing, terrifyingly distant, and capricious. In an article about the book of Job, the New Yorker calls Job the least sympathetic character in the book. Today, we're going to do a reset on the story of Job, using rarely quoted passages. Our prayer is that believers will make peace with the God of Job. This reset is built on respect for Job's perseverance and on his unwavering belief in a powerful God, but it challenges the traditional interpretation in other ways. It provides a masterful lesson on the sacred purposes of suffering and on the character of God and man. Let's return now to some of those astounding passages in Job 29 when Job recalls walking through the public square. Job said, "Whoever heard me spoke well of me, and those who saw me commended me. Men listened to me expectantly, waiting in silence for my counsel. And after I had spoken, they spoke no more. My words fell gently on their ears. They waited for me as for showers, and they drank in my words as the spring rain. When I smiled at them, they could scarcely believe it. The light of my face was precious to them." Job's view of himself raises a number of questions. First, was it realistic? The answer is, how could it be? Job was the greatest leader in the East. No great leader has survived without naysayers. And as with every leader, there are people jealous of his success. Experience teaches us that the only leaders who believe that they are universally commended are those who shut out criticism. Second question, was Job's view of himself righteous? The great Christian writer Andrew Murray said, "The closer one gets to the light, the more he sees the impurities of his own soul." Job, in contrast, stated he had done everything right. Moses was called the most humble man on earth. The Apostle Paul said that if he were trying to please man, he couldn't please Christ. Third question, does Job's love of human adoration sound familiar? If you know your Bible, it should. Remember Christ's description of the New Testament Pharisees? Beware of the teachers of the law. They like to walk around in flowing robes and love to be greeted with respect in the marketplaces, and have the most important seats in the synagogues and the places of honor at banquets. They devour widows' houses and for show make lengthy prayers. These men will be punished most severely. Elsewhere in the scriptures, God said, "I will not yield my glory to another." But in reminiscing about the good old days, Job uttered, "I thought my glory will not fade." Let's look at other things Job said about himself. "I put on righteousness as my clothing, justice was my robe and my turban." To Bible believers, this sentiment also sounds familiar. Remember the New Testament Pharisee who thanked God that he was more righteous than other people? The tax collector, who was also in the temple that day, confessed that he was a sinner and begged God for mercy. Christ said, "For all those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted." The Pharisee was not justified in the sight of God, so how could Job be? Job named at least 24 ways in which he was righteous. Most readers take these claims at face value. But let us dig deeper. Job said he counseled the widows since he was born. Compare this with Psalm 51 verse 5 when King David said, "Surely I was sinful at birth, sinful from the time my mother conceived me." Job said he reared the fatherless from his youth. It is possible that he reared children before he had his own home. But is it likely? Job said he helped all the vulnerable populations: the fatherless, the orphans, the widows, the hungry, the strangers, the lame, the blind, the travelers, his servants, and his family. Now, those who work in the helping professions know that usually organizations specialize in one or two types of vulnerable populations. But Job said he helped them all. That's possible, but let's run a movie in our minds. Let's think about the type of operations required to accomplish such a feat. To clothe the needy, servants would have to sew clothes and distribute clothes. To be eyes to the blind and feet to the lame, Job might have sent couriers to the homes of the disabled. Job said he housed all the strangers. He would need many bedrooms for that. To provide food for the hungry, servants would have to slaughter the animals, grow the wheat, collect the food, make the meals, serve the food, and manage distribution. There would have to be cleanup operations too. And they would need intelligence to locate every needy, blind, lame, and traveling person. We're talking a major philanthropic organization here. Job's claims of universal benevolence raise even more questions. Question 1. Why weren't his large-scale operations described in the Bible? Joseph, under the Egyptian king Pharaoh, ran massive philanthropic operations to give out grain during a famine. These were described, but Job's were not. Question 2. After the tragedies, why didn't Job mourn for those he could no longer help? People who run philanthropic organizations know the names, the families, and the stories of people they benefit. When Corrie ten Boom was released from the Nazi death camps, she constantly pondered the fates of those left behind. When the Apostle Paul was in prison and preparing for dying, he fixated on leaving instructions for his followers. But after catastrophe struck, Job never once talked about those he was no longer able to help. Question 3, and this is the most critical one. Job's benevolence would have affected hundreds, if not thousands, of people. After all, the East was a very large area. One would expect them to support Job in droves, bring bowls of stew, attend the children's funerals, show up with sympathy. But how did they actually react? They humiliated, jeered, ridiculed, and mocked Job. They detested him. They surrounded him with hostility. They spit at him. They struck him on his cheek. They made him a laughingstock. They filled him with shame. Job talked about his lost reputation more than any other loss. Spewing such hatred takes energy, and it takes motive. Particularly angry at Job were the starving young men who lived among the rocks. Given Job's self-described philanthropy, one would expect that these homeless youth would love him, that they would well up in gratitude, that they would share their stories and dreams with him. Instead, in Job 30 verse 1, Job said, "Now they mock me, men younger than I, whose fathers I would have disdained to put with my sheepdogs." In appraising their fathers as less than sheepdogs, Job suggested that these young men were less than human. Even though they were neither his servants nor his employees, Job appraised them through the eyes of a cold, heartless businessman. He mused how they could benefit him, but concluded they were useless. He said, "Of what use was the strength of their hands to me, since their vigor had gone from them?" In other words, they were too weak from hunger to work for him. It's no wonder they despised him. When Job heard the sequence of events that took away his possessions, the loss of livestock took precedence over the loss of lives of Job's servants. For example, the death of the oxen and donkeys preceded news of the death of his servants. The death of his sheep preceded news of the death of his servants. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe the bearers of bad news knew where Job's priorities lay. Question 4. Who else testified that Job was generous to the most vulnerable populations? Think about human witnesses only. We will address the Lord's opening statements in a later video. Who else said, "Yeah, Job, you were really generous"? The answer is not one person. In fact, Eliphaz, whose name means pure gold, said, "Job, you demanded security from your relatives with no reason." Now, security, as we know, is something you give a lender as a pledge. If you don't pay back your loan, the lender takes possession of whatever you pledged. In the United States, lenders took more than 10 million homes as security after the economic collapse of 2008. In the Bible, security was pledged in the form of cloaks, houses, axes, and even children. If it were excessive or unreasonable, taking security was a sin. For example, in Deuteronomy 24 verse 6, accepting a pair of millstones as security for a debt was prohibited because doing so would take away a person's livelihood and food. Taking a widow's garment as security was also forbidden. In Exodus 22 verse 26, a lender who took a neighbor's cloak as security for a loan was required to return it before sunset. So Eliphaz said to Job, "You demanded security from your relatives for no reason." These presumably are the same family members who abandoned him. Then Eliphaz directly challenged Job's representations that he was generous. He said, "You stripped people of their clothing, leaving them naked. You gave no water to the weary, and you withheld food from the hungry, though you were a powerful man, owning land, an honored man, living on it." Eliphaz agreed that Job was an honored man and that he was powerful. But as far as this benevolence thing, Eliphaz said, "No way." He told Job, "You sent the widows away empty-handed, and you broke the strength of the fatherless." Now, if you remember, at the end of the book of Job, God rebuked the first 3 friends. A lot of people think that God rebuked the friends for speaking wrongly about Job. In fact, God rebuked them for speaking wrongly about God. But the 4th friend, young Elihu, escaped God's rebuke. This obscure fact is important when considering what Elihu said to Job. Elihu told Job, "But now you are laden with the judgment due the wicked. Judgment and justice have taken hold of you. Be careful that no one entices you by riches. Do not let a large bribe turn you aside." And then Elihu said something very significant. He warned Job not to long for the night to drag people away from their homes. Now, why would Elihu warn Job against dragging people away from their homes in the middle of the night unless he had some basis to believe it would actually happen? Imagine talking to a family member or friend like that. You wouldn't warn somebody against doing something that bad unless it was part of their nature and you were afraid they were going to do it. To drag people away from their homes, Job had to have some sort of authority. The logical assumption is that Job was taking security for the loans he had made. The same is true about stripping people of their clothing. It makes sense that the clothing was security for loans. Let's look at indirect statements. Admittedly, this is subtle, but it's very important. Throughout the book of Job, his 4 friends continually talk about the wicked. On the surface, this seems to be irrelevant chatter. But a deeper look suggests they were referring to Job, and Job conceded that point. The wicked love bribes, which correlates to Elihu's warning to Job about bribery. The wicked oppress the poor and leave them destitute. The wicked seize houses they have not built. Fire devours the tents of the wicked. Well, fire devoured Job's belongings. And his friends warned him to keep evil out of his tent. The skin of the wicked is eaten away. Well, Job's skin was eaten away. The righteous rejoice when the wicked are ruined, which is what happened to Job. What really clinches this theory is that Job repeatedly acknowledged that his friends were talking about him. In one instance, he responded, "I could make fine speeches against you and shake my head at you." In another, when Bildad talked about the wicked and didn't even mention Job's name, Job responded, 10 times now you've reproached me. Shamelessly you attack me." When Zophar said the wicked sees houses he did not build, Job responded by saying, "Mock on." In Job 21, Job tells his friends, "I know full well what you are thinking, the schemes by which you would wrong me. You say, 'Where now is the house of the great man, the tents where the wicked lived?'" And so, in each case, when his friends talked about the mythical wicked third party, Job said, "I know you're talking about me." And at one point he said, essentially, "If I have sinned, it's none of your business." Job also said, in essence, "I could say a lot about you too." These are classic statements to deflect guilt. Many argue that in accusing Job of wrongdoing, his friends were saying, "Job, you must have done something wrong to deserve the suffering." But that's not what they said. They didn't speculate on various sins he could have committed. They didn't toss out diverse theories. One didn't say, "Job, you must have committed sexual immorality." Nor did another say, "You must have worshipped the sun or the moon." Nor did a third say, "You must have cursed God." Instead, they all accused Job of the same sin, terrible business practices that took advantage of people. Deuteronomy 19, verse 15 says that one witness is not enough to convict anyone accused of an offense. A matter must be established by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. In Job's case, there were 4. And these 4 had no motivation to lie. They left their houses and their jobs to sit with Job for weeks and maybe even months. They had nothing to gain financially because Job was broke and out of power. Instead, they wanted Job to repent and be restored because they said that over and over again. That's why the scriptures call them friends. Bildad told Job, "If you are pure and upright, even now he will rouse himself on your behalf and restore you to your prosperous state." Eliphaz said, "If you return to the Almighty, you will be restored." Elihu said, "Then that person can pray to God and find favor with him. They will see God's face and shout for joy. He will restore them to full well-being." And after the Lord shrewdly turned Job over to Satan to work his purpose of humbling Job, that's exactly what happened. Job's friends were doing what Christ in Matthew 18, verse 16 said should be done when someone is caught in sin. They were trying to reason with him. As the English Quaker rector Reverend John Fry said in the early 1800s, Job had fallen into the snare of the devil, and the Lord was lovingly exposing and correcting something in his child that offended God. Before we go to our final point in today's video, let's look at an important phrase, "in his eyes," or "in their eyes." Proverbs 28, verse 11 states, "The rich are wise in their own eyes. One who is poor and discerning sees how deluded they are." Proverbs 30, verse 12 says, "There are those who are pure in their own eyes and yet are not cleansed of their filth." Isaiah 5, verse 2 states, "Woe to those who are wise in their own eyes and clever in their own sight." Why is this phrase important? Because it explains why, after Job's friends were not successful in persuading him, they quit trying. After all the debates, they stopped. Why? Because Job was righteous in his own eyes. For more insights on the book of Job, pick up a copy of The Joy of Job, an investigator's perspective on the most righteous man on earth. It is available through Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Itasca Books, Adobe Digital, iBooks, Kindle, and through many other locations. Or download an excerpt at joyofjob.com. In part 2 of this video series, we will ask the question of who was right, Job or his friends.